We just got a little bit of a clearing something up with our technical gear here, so just in a few minutes, so thank you. Thank you, please. Could you take your seats? Yes, good morning, Your Worship, councillors. And we do have our Te Tātou representative here. Good morning, Eugene. Welcome this morning, councillors, to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting today, the 12th of April. 2018. Welcome to you all. Now, at this stage, we are having a technical hitch with the live streaming, so that will come on at some stage in the near future, but I would like to start our meeting now. We can get the minutes taken, so we are going to start now. I would like to ask you please to turn off your phones and store them away during the meeting. If you do need to take a break, then please ask, and if it's urgent, we'll cause a halt, and I'll call for a halt, and we'll make sure that you get your messages if they're urgent. But thank you very much for that, for agreeing to that. So thank you. So we'll move on to, and also to members of the public, good morning and welcome this morning. Any apologies, please? Well, we do have apologies. We've got apologies from Councillor Charles Sturt, Councillor Donaldson, who is away on councillor business, and Mrs. Trumper and Mr. Thomas are also apologies today. So may I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Gould. So that the apologies be accepted. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you, carried. Yes, but Your Worship. Right. Well, I did mention he was on council business.
I know, but it's quite nice to know that you're doing hearings.
Yes, certainly. Yes. So, and those hearings, they're for the Transport Committee, is that right? Or the regional transport, very important for us too. So, it's in Tauranga, so that, and I understand the hearings have been set down for 3 days. So yes, thank you for that, Your Worship. Declarations of interest, Carl. Any items of urgent, any urgent items for the agenda today? Thank you. Confirmation of our minutes, and they are on page 7 of our hard copy. Thank you, Councillor. It's been moved, Councillor Gould, seconded Councillor Maxwell, that the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 15th of March 2018 being confirmed as true and correct. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Are there any... Oh, I beat the gun there. I should have asked if there are any changes or amendments. No. So thank you very much. That's carried. Recommendations from other committees. Page 13. We do have one there. Thank you, yes. Could I please have a mover and a seconder to receive the brief report on this recommendation, that the report recommendations from other committees be received? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Carried. Good morning, Thomas. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Not sure there's any questions relating to this that you would like me to answer. I guess I'll just provide a brief overview of what our intention is. So at the completion of the long-term plan, which will be adopted at the end of June, we will start working on the 2020 annual plan. As part of that process, we will look to undertake a funding review as discussed in the previous workshops, and we'll look to kick those series of workshops off pre-Christmas this year. If at the end of that process that there is an intention to change any of the funding policies of Council's activities, then that will form a consultative process at approximately April 2019, the following year. So, any questions?
So this has come from the Lakes Community Board?
Correct. So as part of the long-term plan discussions, there was always a wish to review the funding policy of our activities. So for those that are listening that aren't aware of what I'm talking about there, that's around how we fund our activities and what rates are used. So whether an activity should be funded via the general rate, or it should be a targeted rate, or should be more user fees. So we did look at some of our activities during this long-term plan with the focus on user fees. And we will take the opportunity after the long-term plan to look at whether general rates or targeted rates or a mix of those are a better method of funding our activities going forward.
So long-term plan out of the way first, and then...
Correct, yes. So the intention is to get the long-term plan out of the way and then to look at that.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I've spoken with Phil Thomas, the Chair, who wanted to give us sincere apologies for not being able to be here. He did want to present to this issue, but believed that it was going to be in the May agenda. However, he's very happy that it has come on here and wanted to acknowledge this new innovative way of having the Community Board's recommendations being able to come in front of councillors on this agenda. This issue has come up at several of their long-term plan and community engagement meetings. They had asked for this for 3 years, so we're very pleased to have it come and are looking forward to seeing it as soon as possible. And those are comments from Phil himself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Berryman Kim, then Your Worship.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So just to clarify, this request will be part of a LTP submission?
No, so just to clarify this request, our intention is always to do a funding review after the long-term plan, as we talked about in our previous workshops. So this will not form part of the long-term plan. So once the long-term plan has been completed, then we will start the next series of workshops around looking at our funding policy and activities.
Thank you. Your Worship. No, it's well, yes, it is a little bit outside of possibly the norm, but however, I think, Your Worship, the rural community has always been a little bit on this topic. Yes, and I think they saw it as an opportunity to come to this, to bring it to this committee for consideration, then to take it further, obviously. And it is on our work plan anyway, as you know.
So is this a precedent for put items forward that are recommendations outside of other processes?
Well, I think what we're asking them to add value, obviously, and if it's something that they see that they would like to have considered, this is one way of doing it. I don't see any issue really with it. Do you think it's stepping a little bit outside and could open the door? Well, I think the thing is that they actually want to ensure, as Councillor Tapsell has said, this is something that they've been raising for a number of years, and I think this is something that they want to ensure that it does actually, that we hear about it as councillors, and that we are hopefully going to do something about it. So this is one way of bringing it to our attention through this committee. So I'm happy with it. And I think in the future, if anything comes that I feel is not appropriate, then I'll bat it away. So thank you. And by the way, we are now live streaming. So to those who are watching from afar, no mai haere mai, welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting this morning. We did have some issues with a slight technical hitch there, so you're joining us just as we start our meeting this morning. So welcome, and I apologise for that you weren't with us right at the start. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. I understand the necessity to undertake rating reviews when, for example, a 3-yearly cycle of revaluations has taken place, and that makes sense. But perhaps Thomas could actually explain what is the likely impact if we made changes in terms of its effect on the long-term plan.
So, that's a good question, Councillor. At one end, we have to enter a process whereby we will look at the principles of how we fund our activities and why, and that looks at who benefits, who exacerbates, whether there's a targeted benefit or there's a general benefit. And so you have to go through that process. Now, during that process, it may end up that we end up exactly the same place as we are now, that we're happy with the way that our activities are being funded, at which point there's no implication on our long-term plan. On the other extreme, there could be a change to one or many of the activities, and it may just be that activity shouldn't be funded from the general rate and should be done from a targeted rate. And then so the moment you therefore introduce a new rate, you're changing funding policy, you're changing rating. That would then trigger an amendment to the long-term plan and would therefore require us to consult. And so if that were to happen, that's something that we would look to do in April next year as part of the annual planning cycle. So two different approaches, and it just all depends on how we work through these issues and these workshops going forward as to where we end up.
Thank you, Thomas. Councillor Gould?
Madam Chair, thank you, Thomas, for your report. Does this mean if the proposal goes ahead and there's a change recommended, does it mean the other residents around Rotorua have the ability now to apply for objections or apply for a review of the policy for the rest of their residents?
I think that might have just been explained, that it would have to, if there were any changes, it would have to go out to public consultation again. So, yes, your point is well made, but I think that's the case, isn't it, what you've just explained to us?
That is correct. If there is an amendment, that change that triggers an amendment to the long-term plan, then we would obviously be required to go out and consult with the community on those changes, yes. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Gould. Well, thank you. Oh, now I better put that then, that the following recommendations, or recommendation of the Lakes Community Board meeting held on the 14th of February 2018 be adopted, and I will read what that recommendation is. It's a rates review, that the Lakes Community Board formally requests that Council confirm the timing and process for the comprehensive rates review during the 2018-2019 financial year, with a focus for the 2019-2020 annual plan. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Thank you. Now, staff reports again. Staff reports. Recommendation 1, the Traffic Bylaw 2015, the review deliberations. Now, that's on our page 15 of our hard copy. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, Traffic Bylaw 2015 Review Deliberations? Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Good morning, Rosemary. You're going to overview the report this morning. Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, so the traffic bylaw was reviewed because there were some amendments recommended in relation to shared paths and shared zones. So there's been a process where the public have been able to make submissions on that, and I think last month you heard from 2 of the oral submissions, and you have other submissions to consider. I'll take the report basically as read because I think you've been over this a couple of times already. But basically the intent of the changes is to introduce the ability for council to designate areas as a shared zone or a shared path, and in making that designation you can then set the rules around how they operate. So this is really just putting in place that power for that to happen. There is one additional matter that was raised, and it is meant to be a track change in your paper, but it hasn't come through as that, and that is on page 22 of your hard copy at 3.1. It's the definition of authorised officer, and we had a recommendation from staff that that should be amended to more appropriately reflect who an authorised officer actually is. So where that reads authorised officer means any person appointed or authorised by council to act on its behalf, includes parking wardens under the Act, or police officers and so on. Previously that just said an employee of council, which obviously wasn't as specific as the actual people who would normally you'd expect to be the authorised officers. So that's the only other change that is recommended.
Thank you. So that change, actually, you have changed it here in our hard copy. Thank you. Right, so that wasn't the track change. Thank you. That's it, is it, Rosemary? Thank you. And those track changes are on page 24 and 31, which I'm sure you would have seen. And thank you, because that does clarify exactly what we mean by those shared spaces. And so that's, thank you for that report. I know there will be some questions, Rosemary. Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I did raise this issue when we were looking at it before. The definition of a shared zone there on page 24 means a length of roadway intended to be used by pedestrians and vehicles, including cyclists. That definition actually then encompasses any roadway that doesn't have a footpath.
Yes. So the New Zealand Transport Authority Agency has actually got that definition in their guidance around how councils should actually set up the ability in the traffic bylaw to do this. So that's actually taken from their recommendation.
Well, it may be their problem that we're inheriting, but under this definition, any roadway that did not have a footpath is by definition a roadway that is used by pedestrians, cyclists and cars. So what is the point in the definition of a shared zone? So the Lequins a shared zone is defined in the Land Transport Road Rule as a length of roadway intended to be used by pedestrians and vehicles. Okay, and it's around how you then control that shared zone. So then those controls would apply to any roadway which doesn't have a footpath by the definition that you've got here of a shared zone. That's the issue I've got.
I think you would determine what is a shared zone. I mean, I guess a proposal would come to council to say, we suggest that this be made a shared zone and you need to make that designation of a specified space and say this is now a shared zone and here are the rules we're putting in place around the use of that shared zone.
Okay, so it would have to be a designated shared zone.
Absolutely. Yes. So this will simply put in place the ability for you to make a designation to actually define that space. It doesn't. It could potentially cover all roads, but I would imagine that there'll be some specified spaces that you'll be considering that are obvious ones to be a shared zone. And I think the public have been asking for a bit more guidance, in fact, around how those spaces to be used, and that's exactly what this will enable you to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, thank you, Rosemary, for your report. Page 16, when you're talking about shared pathways, you're talking about the whole of the city area, the rural area and the lakes areas. I'm correct to that, the whole Rotorua district. Is that correct?
No, again, this is a matter of you deciding which paths you would like to be shared, and if they're a shared path, then you define which are the shared paths, and you put in place the rules around that you want to put in place. So I think going forward with the cycleway program, there's some purpose-built paths that are much wider and so on, and there's e-bikes coming along. There's all sorts of things to consider around the shared use. Whereas some of the older paths we've inherited are quite narrow, and you may want to put some different rules in place around how those shared paths operate.
The second question, shared pathway, when you talk about cyclists and walkers, does it also cover skateboarders too or not?
Yes, it covers any kind of recreational wheeled things. It could be skateboards. The scooters are really common at the moment, but it's also the disabled scooters and some of the e-bikes. There's a number of different, and as technology is changing, there's new things coming along all the time, and I guess it's the ability to control that safely for everybody.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Kemp?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm not too sure if this is within the scope of this, but recently I've received some correspondence of concern about children walking along Bournes Road, the upper Tengai Road, where there's not footpaths, and walking on the side of the road, just in terms of main highway, everything else. Is there something within this traffic bylaw that can be applied to that, or is there a separate mechanism to looking at how we make those roads safer? Those pedestrian or cycle access ways safer?
I think it's probably a separate matter where there isn't actually a path for pedestrians next to a road. I think that's probably another matter. It's not covered by this amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Rosemary, is there any footpaths within the Rotorua area that are not shared cycleways or exclusive use for pedestrians only?
Well, at the moment, you haven't actually got the power to designate an area to say that it's formally legally a shared path and so on. So although the cycleway has started to do that, and there are some public expectations and some confusion around that, you haven't actually got the power yet until this amendment is in place to actually make those designations. But I would imagine that you would expect that most of your cycleway will be probably coming up for your approval, say, might make this formally a shared path. But I would imagine there'll be other places that you might look at and think, actually, it's not suitable, the design isn't wide enough for that. So I think I would imagine that the Transport Department will be coming forward with some recommendations fairly soon.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to talk on page 25 with regards to metered parking. When parking in metered spaces, I see over here that we've got 7.1.2 between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. on those days. We're currently only policing it up till 5 p.m. So is this future-proofing, or am I just being pedantic?
This is part of the existing bylaw that hasn't been reviewed. It's just the amendments that are being put forward that were reviewed. The bylaw was looked at in 2015. So we're just looking at the shared zones and shared paths, so the things that this is really focused on. So that hasn't changed.
Thank you. And Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just on page 29, under the parking of heavy motor vehicles, the district plan has been amended so that the parking of heavy trailers is included in the definition of heavy motor vehicles. And I note in here that our heavy motor vehicle definition has the same meaning as the Land Transport Act 1998. Does that include heavy trailers or not?
Sorry, I can't answer that. I don't know the detail of that at all.
Can I suggest perhaps that's put down for consideration for a future amendment, so that parking of heavy trailers such as logging trucks, second trailer or the big heavy trailers is actually caught by this definition.
Thank you. Good point. Thank you very much, Councillor Kent. Thank you for that discussion this morning. So I'm going to thank you, Rosemary. So no further discussion. So could I please have a mover and a second? Oh, there's a call for a move. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. That the committee recommends to Council that the amendments to the Rotorua District Council Traffic Bylaw 2015, as shown in Attachment 1 and the track changes version, be approved. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you very much. Recommendation 2 of our staff reports, which is on page 40. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, statements of intent for council-controlled organisations for the year commencing the 1st of July 2018. Thank you, Councillor Kent. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Good morning, Henry. You're to overview this piece of work this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just have a brief presentation. We will just go through each of the CCOs one at a time, and we will pause during the presentation at the end of each of those for questions.
Yes, thank you. I'd like that, because otherwise we've got 3 or 4 of them and then banking up at the end with questions. So it'd be good if we can take that pause. Thank you.
So I will take the report as written. So just for a reminder, and for those that are watching, that Council does have 4 CCOs, or council-controlled organisations. They are Infracore, the Rotorua Regional Airport, TREX, and Rotorua Economic Development. So we'll start off with Infracore. So Infracore is in the business of maintaining and constructing infrastructure and facilities for Rotorua Lakes Council. In particular, its focus is on parks, reserves, playgrounds, sport fields, the 3 water networks, so that's wastewater, stormwater, and the water reticulation, janitorial of the toilet blocks and street cleaning, particularly of the CBD, cemetery and crematorium. So it does receive council funding of $10.7 million per year for the operations for those activities, and also has the ability to contest for work as well, which council determines as capital works. And it carries external debt of about $1 million, and that's tied to obviously the infrastructure assets, their plant and equipment such as tractors and mowers and those sorts of items. With regards to the statement of intent, we have asked and we've had discussions with both the chair and the executive of Infracore around looking to refine its purpose and its objectives. So it did have 5 or so very wide goals and objectives, and we have asked to refine those down with a greater emphasis on a stronger partnership model with council, verification of cost effectiveness, and growth be focused on leveraging of strategic partnerships. And so whether Henry wishes to add anything to that or open to questions.
Oh, thank you, Henry. No, that's fine.
Yeah, he was happy to wait for questions.
And I know that we have got it. That's excuse me. The Infracore one is where did I put? Where is it now? Oh. 44, yes, page 44. So that's the start of the statement of intent for the Infracore Limited, and we've got that there. So I will take questions from councillors at this point. I'm sure there will be some. Councillor Gould.
Chair, thank you for your report. On your previous slide, you quoted external debt of $1 million.
That is correct.
Do you wish to know what that? Yes, what that's for or made up of? Thank you.
As I said at the time, that covers the yes, replacement of their plant and equipment. So they do have significant fleet, for example, and plant and equipment to deliver those services, and that those borrowings are used for the ongoing replacement of those assets.
Thank you. Mr. Berriman-Kam.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your report. My question is pertaining to point 1 there, stronger partnership model with council. What I don't see in the SOI is any expansion of that partnership model with council and Te Tātou. Now, I remember when we received the SOI last year, there was considerable discussion about how do we incorporate the new partnership model that the council is progressing in terms of our CCOs. A couple of them have got a little bit of things, but what I wanted, my question is, from your perspective, working with the CCOs, has the move to a partnership with Te Tātou actually been actively considered in the generation of this SOI? Because I guess we're talking about the Infracore one right now, because I can't see it.
And I think you're right, there's nothing specific in the SOI, and what we're really suggesting, if you go to the SOI and on page 47 of your hard copy, what we're really saying is, if you look under item 3, the top 2 bullet points we're suggesting really should be given primacy. So those are the bullet points really around the high quality, cost effective services and the working in partnership to deliver outcomes for Rotorua. And while there's nothing specific in that around Te Tātou, I think implicit in it at least is that we are looking at a different way of working with them. And even when we look at number 3 up there around, we think there should be more emphasis on leveraging strategic partnerships as a means of achieving growth. That's another fairly obvious way, but we haven't wanted to go down into the detail of exactly how you achieve stuff. We want to keep it at the high level of how we want them to work, rather than exactly what we want them to do.
Something to be signalled, do you think, to their board?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I do understand your explanation, so that's fine. But I guess the key thing is I'm not seeing an awful lot of change from last year in the words, and these strategic documents guide the organisation. So whilst I appreciate there might be some implicit things, in my experience, unless there's a bullet point saying we'll work with our partners such as Te Tātou on, that's unlikely to progress. So I guess my question would be, is it possible to feed that back to the Infracore board to see if we can get an amendment to the SOI that better reflects the partnership model?
thanks for that. And certainly my response would be if around this table you want that feedback to be given, absolutely.
Thank you. I think, Jeff, you wanted to make a point?
If I could, I think the presence of Te Tato in the committee is actually an important one, because what I've seen, and I'd use the airport as an example here with regards to the work that they're currently doing on their master plan, they're very, very clear that the accountability and their reporting is to this committee, and therefore they will be scrutinised on how they actually operate on matters such as actually the development and implementation of the master plan. To that end, what they're looking to do at this stage is they've identified clearly the mana whenua status of the underlying land, and at the same time are looking at how they could enact some level of partnership options with iwi to achieve the outcomes that they're trying to gain. So I think that whilst some of the actions themselves are explicit in the SOI, the actual way that they are looking to undertake their business is actually very much informed by the presence of Te Tato with regards to the accountability from the shareholder when they actually present to this committee.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Your Worship, thank you.
Question. I would have read myself that the partnership with council inherent in that is Te Tato, because that's the partnership that we have, council and Te Tato. If, though this is our statement of intent that we're handing over to Infracore, if there was something explicit that you wanted, such as more opportunities for apprenticeships or, you know, that's something that can be worked through. I don't think it goes in the statement of intent, and I'd just like some legal sort of clarification around, do we break it down to those objectives?
No. Oh,
no.
Sorry. Yes, yes.
To a degree, it is your call in terms of the nature of the feedback you want to provide, but it is worth saying it is Infracore's statement of intent in the processes. They provide it to us in first instance. We put together the feedback to go back to them, and then they consider how they're going to reflect that feedback in their final document.
Just get clarification then. I heard a desire to have Te Tato specifically reflected. Do we have to say that we work in partnership with council, including Te Tato?
Yes, you want to clarify? Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So maybe just for clarification, and I do take on board those points. I think my key point is, for instance, I won't jump in ahead in terms of depth, but in another two of the CCO's statements of intent, I can see threads of the Te Tato relationship explicitly noted in their statement of intent, whereas I can't see it in this one, which was a bit odd considering that Infracore are looking for a stronger partnership. So I guess that my point is whether or not it's in partnership with Te Tato, or whatever the wording is, but I guess it's that key thing my questioning is more about. Whilst I appreciate that we may be informing their thinking, I would like to see the outcome of that informing reflected in the statement of intent from those boards. So that's where I'm coming from.
And I think Henry's picked up on that as well. So thank you. I'm going to move on. Councillor Bentley, and there's Councillor Bentley, Councillor Kumar, then Councillor Kent, and a number of others as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question relates to infrastructural work that Council has that it appears of late that we now give it to Castle Corp when in actual fact it should be tendered. Is this going to become a policy of the future?
I'm not sure of the specific example, and I think what we're accepting really through the relationship with the CCO and statement of intent is that we will be their primary customer. It's not saying in every instance we'll contract with them, but certainly I would expect primacy to be given to the relationship with the company you own. But it will depend on circumstances and obviously skill levels, and there does need to be, as we've sort of highlighted, some really good means of verifying cost effectiveness, and sometimes tendering is a means of doing that. But we're not saying we will treat them as any other contract and contract out everything or tender out everything.
Thank you. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Henry and Thomas. Over the last 18 months, as far as Infraco has been concerned, all I hear is hard luck, bad luck, and clearly to me it's struggling, and then there's a lot of cutbacks. My question are these 3 key bullet points
concerned at the use of the words there without Infraco being here? I think they have a natural justice opportunity to respond to that, and I'm not sure what you're even meaning, Councillor Kumar.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. It's not going to be a point of order. It is. I've heard the words that were used, and I think we've had information come to the table that does not suggest that they are struggling. It does suggest that there are challenges. They're operating in a challenging environment. So I am going to let you put your question now to Henry. Thank you, Mr. Weston.
Okay, I could have easily rephrased that, but anyway, my questions are these 3 key bullet points going to be the way forward?
Thanks, Councillor. You mean the 3 up on the board? Look. Fundamentally, and again, I'll go back to this isn't a revolutionary approach. We're suggesting in terms of the feedback. We really are looking at the purpose and objectives as they're written, and really saying, look, as they're written, there's no way of getting a sense of which objectives have primacy over the others, and we're not saying that a number of them and all of them don't have validity, but what we're absolutely saying is let's get the primary purpose right, which is around delivering the best outcomes possible for Rotorua, and by working in the partnership with the council to do that. And then these other aspects essentially become more like means of achieving that. So they're means of helping Infraco get to that. So these are the core 3, and it's not to say the others aren't relevant, but those are the core.
Madam Chair, thank you. I just want to add to that at no stage was my line of questioning aggressive. Just wanted to know if anything of this would lead to job losses. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we did hear from the CEO when he presented a month or so ago. When was it? Last month or 6 weeks ago? That's to be preventable at all costs, but you never know in the environment in which they're operating, so yes. So thank you. It isn't, Councillor Kumar, it is sometimes about the way we do phrase, put our views across, and around the table we should be respectful of it. We should be using respectful language, and that goes for all of us. Sometimes we get a bit impatient with each other and with what we've got to discuss, but it is about trying to make sure our language fits the boardroom. That's really, and that perhaps would be a message for all of us, myself included. I know I've been remiss at times. Thank you. Councillor Mohi, Ms. Mohi, and Councillor Tapsell. Good morning, Ms. Mohi.
Firstly, for late arrival this morning. Just picking up on what Eugene was saying, but taking it a little bit wider in terms of perhaps referencing specifically Te Aroha iwi. There's a statement in the SOI that mentions the page 53.
What page are we looking at?
47, sorry.
Oh,
the
yes, I've got that.
Objectives, and mentions working in partnership with Council to deliver the best experiences for the community and visitors. I would suggest adding and Te Aroha into that, and that sort of reflects the long-term desire for by Te Arawa, particularly post-settlement entities and land trusts, to engage with council in partnership, infrastructure partnership opportunities. The other issue I was wanting to talk about was perhaps widening or making mention in the SOI, because of some of the purposes of Infracore, particularly with water and wastewater, and the significance that has to Te Arawa, that there is some reference to that cultural and historical relationship and the sites that a lot of these plants are located on. And I'll just get a little bit radical and even suggest to go so far as to suggest that a first right of refusal is given to Te Arawa on any opportunities, and reflecting back to the aquatic centre issue or event, that is clearly a preference given to local private sector first.
Right, well, there are a number of issues there. Oh, well, sorry, there are a number of points that you've raised there. I wonder, Henry, if you want to comment on those. This is their statement of intent that they've put to us to have a look at.
Yep, and they're seeking out feedback.
Yes, to make some comment on and seek feedback. So thank you, Ms. Mohi, for that. Yes,
thank you, and probably just a couple of quick responses. The first would be just reiterating what I said earlier, which is, this is about giving feedback, and is for you around the table to determine what feedback you want to give. But I guess in terms of scope and our ability to suggest changes within the framework of this SOI and this process, I think there are probably a couple of elements which are just much bigger policy issues that will need to be thought about in a wider sense, and probably the right of first refusal, the preference to local, that all falls outside this process. Driving more of an emphasis in terms of these words around partnership with Te Arawa, again, as I've said, I think if that's the feedback you want to be providing from around this table, absolutely.
Thank you for that, Ms. Mohi. Henry, I just wondered, yes, there will be points that fall outside of this, but I just wonder if a note could be made so that they are aware that some of these things have been mentioned at the table, they are of concerns, and they may like to give that some consideration. So, thank you. Yes, Ms. Mohi.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it may be, because I don't quite understand how those documents work, but it may be reflected at that lower level of the service agreements.
Yes. Or even if within the manner of how they then perhaps might proceed with carrying out their mahi. Kia ora. I'd just like to move on to Councillor Kent, Councillor Tapsell, and Your Worship. Councillor Kent, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I'd just like to raise the issue on page 55, the performance targets, whether in fact the measurement for cost to serve and charges to council for core operation and maintenance services are actually relevant. It seems to me that when we've got Infracore, who's charged with civil construction and maintenance work with footpaths, paving streets, all that type of asset, and improving wastewater, stormwater facilities and so on, how can we tie that to a CPI increase? Because that does not seem to bear any relationship to the amount of work that needs to be done, or whether in fact we're actually going to improve those services in the district.
No, so council, improving of those services in those districts fall within council itself as responsibility, and would ultimately report on the achievement of that. I guess the CPI index to them is to cover their BAU, and is it a good reflection of them being cost effective and managing their costs and the delivery of that BAU? It would be an easy one to measure, and so that's probably why it has been chosen, but there could be alternative ways of doing it as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Tapsell?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Henry and Thomas. The questions that I have today, and I'm glad that we're able to provide comment on this, my questions all kind of relate to my strong belief that our people are our greatest asset, and my desire for our staff to be looked after as we continue to grow this area of business. I notice a growing theme in in them wanting to pursue external contracts outside of Rotorua. So my comment would just be to have more clarity around what pursuing work outside Rotorua would look like. Is it our local staff travelling? Are they happy with travelling? Can we still ensure that Rotorua will be maintained to an excellent service? And just around, I'll go to the performance measures as Councillor Kent has looked at as well. In organisational capacity, the KPI 11, reducing value of employee benefit liabilities as a measure of work-life balance. It's just things like that that make me unsure and want to seek further clarity and provide that comment that we would like further clarity on whether that is actually a positive thing for our staff, and going back to that belief of mine that our people are a greatest asset and wanting to ensure that they are put as a priority and valued just as much as the economic returns that will come from their hard work.
So Councillor, those questions that you asked at the start with regards to would we be asking them if they were looking at external work are exactly what we expect from them. So I think part of the refining of this is emphasising that Council is the keystone partner and key client in this. So therefore, if there is an expansion of services, it would be looking to leverage off that rather than looking to grow and replace it and entering into those difficult situations of trying to replicate what we've got across the other side of the country, for example. So making sure that anything that they do is not at the detriment of Council ultimately. With regards to performance measure 11, what they're referring to there is that similar to Council, they have a lot of long-serving staff that have high leave balances, and they are looking at reducing those leave balances by encouraging their staff to take more leave for that work-life balance. That's what that one refers to.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt?
Thank you. Henry, just a note on the bottom of page 41, need about extending employment and training opportunities, and I just wonder what training opportunities are available currently in Infracore, and what parts of the business do they cover, because this was an issue that I was particularly supportive of, so I'm pleased to see that that's going to get more focus, and I just wondered what are they currently doing and what changes could we expect to see when they put more of a focus in this area?
Thanks for that, and look, I apologise if my answer's a little bit circular on this. The reason why we've emphasised it in the report and in the feedback we're proposing is because it's one of the objectives they've put forward in the draft SOI, which is around extending employment and training options. And I guess what we've heard around this table over the last, I expect much longer than the last year or so, is some sort of wish from some to see Infracore playing a greater social role, and particularly in terms of youth and employment and training. So what we've really suggested to them is instead of have it as a slightly undefined objective, what we're suggesting, look, if this is an issue we really want to be looking at, let's focus on doing some work this year to understand what that could look like, and then it's an open discussion which Council can look at and say, okay, what is the role we want Infracore to play in the longer term with this social and employment issues, but what we're highlighting to them is that we think they need to be doing some work on what that could look like. So it's a long way of saying we're not totally clear what it looks like, which is why we're suggesting they should do some work on that first.
Thank you. And they could, yes, they need to think about that too. And they don't have to do it all on their own, by the way. There are other partners, such as Te Homai, and that could be very helpful in developing something that, that would go some way to achieving something along those lines. Your Worship.
I wonder from the conversation, have we forgotten when we first set up Infracore? And at that time we talked about a social enterprise agency, and the chairs came back and have been very clear that that's not the role of Infracore. We wanted them to be cost effective and efficient because we had this financial drive on effective services. But I like the look after your staff, look after your people aspect that seems to be coming in now. And that, I think, is the intent that we'd like to see reflected. But I wouldn't change the purpose. because that's why the fundamental purpose for why we moved into CCOs rather than an outreach service of within council. And the other bit that I hear some lack of understanding is in the contracting and the tendering. And it might be a subject not in the SOI, but that we get our heads around a little bit more clearly at a later date, because we've got local as a weighting in our criteria, but I think that's not in the SOI debate. That should come back to council perhaps when we're reviewing our tendering process.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. I agree with that part, Your Worship. And I think, Jeff, you were going to make a comment from what you'd heard before. Please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The Mayor's actually pointing out an important issue, and it is a matter for the SOI and the future of the CCO. The last few years of operation has been one where the effectiveness and efficiency of this organisation has been tested through contracting or service delivery. Now, that's required them to compete against the private sector for contracts, both council contracts and others. And you would have heard from the CEO at the last report back that they are now at a point where they are if they haven't picked up a contract, they are only just out of the margin with regards to the preferred tenderer. So with respect to achieving the goal of answering the question, is this an efficient organisation, the CEO's report, I believe, would have given some satisfaction that this organisation is operating efficiently and cost effectively. The board, though, has raised the question, though, is council's intent, as it moves into the future, to package parts of the work that Infracore currently does and to continue to put them to the private sector? Is that what council's wish is? If that is the case, then it will drive a particular response from Infracore. They will continue to focus down a very strong commercial model approach. Now, what this is signalling in this SOI is in fact the move to a partnership model. Now, the partnership model will be based on the concept of giving some certainty to the CCO with respect to the activities that council is expecting it to perform, and expecting that the CCO will look at ways of adding value within the context of the partnership. That's really the next iteration, as opposed to moving to, as I say, package and contract out parts of the work that the organisation does. The other issue, of course, is that the third objective with regards to training and employment to some degree is incompatible with a full contracting out direction. And so if we wish to preserve the social functions of this organisation, they do need some certainty as to what it is that we're expecting them to undertake and the parameters on which they will receive funding to do so, which is Councillor Kent's question to Thomas about the CPI adjustment. The other aspect of this is that with regards to partnership, I used the example earlier today where if you have a relationship with a company to do your own garden maintenance, if you're working in a partnership, the partner will notice that the hedge needs trimming and will suggest the lawn's not mowed this week because perhaps it's not needed, and instead let's do the hedge. Now that's on the assumption that they are doing and able to do both of those activities, and this is exactly the case for Infracore. In order to move to a partnership option, they have to have the ability to undertake a range of tasks that are relevant for council and look to how they can add value across that range of tasks. That's a very different model from specifying each activity down to a fine level of service and then expecting them to provide that at a particular fixed rate cost. So we are that's the implication effectively of moving to this partnership model. But this is your opportunity to question that and to decide whether or not that is the right direction that you continue to wish to go with.
Thank you very much, Jeff. We have had sufficient, I believe we've had sufficient in a discussion on the first of our CCO statements of intent this morning. So I am going to move on now to our next one, which is the T-Rex Limited Partnership.
I thought the airport.
Yes, I can split them individually. Is that what you're wanting? Well, they are all a bit different, and the one might be... well, I was actually going to do them because they will all go... Yes, I'm going to do them all at once. Thank you. Because the various points would be noted as they pertain to each CCO. Thank you.
Yeah, here's the airport one.
Oh, the airport one. Are we looking at that one then? Yep, that's fine. Sorry. That's fine.
So
the Rotorua Regional Airport Limited. Thank you. Good morning.
So we'll go Rotorua Regional Airport, T-Rex, and then I think Rotorua Economic Development is the sequence. So just the airport, just a reminder, the purpose is to maintain a safe and efficient airport while optimising the use of its assets and facilities. And I think the optimising of the use of the assets and facilities is key with regards to the direction that the airport is looking to take. It's focusing on the terminal redevelopment in the short term and a new fire station, and it's working on the master plan for a business park with regards to in the confines of the airport footprint. Council funding is $2.5 million per annum, and it's currently carrying external debt of $15 million. The key discussion point at the moment is that we're currently working together to get a bit more clarity and an alignment on their long-term funding needs and their long-term debt, in particular around the master planning and the potential costs of delivering a business park. Part of those discussions are around the level of debt and whether it can be accelerated to repay that down versus potentially slowing it down, and what those alternative options are that have the potential to benefit both council and the CCO itself, and we're just working through that currently.
Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. Councillor Tapsell and then Miss Mohi. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, Councillor Maxwell.
Oh, hello.
Beg your pardon, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Chair, I just got two quick questions here. First one being, this is on page 64, regarding the board internships, which I think is tremendous. They've already done one. So the question is, they are hoping to interview an appointed second board intern. Are you able to inform us if they've made progress on that particular area?
No, I'm sorry, I don't have details on that for you, Councillor.
Yeah, I can get that information back, but I think that's a good one that they're operating there. Number two, is this the right place to compliment the board? And also, I'm aware Mayor Chadwick was involved. The Air New Zealand Rotorua Wellington flights, I think successful negotiations that went on there. I think it's good for us as a council to compliment the negotiators for doing that on behalf of our community.
Thank you. Ms Mohi?
Kia ora anō. So just, it'll be a similar theme from myself probably as we go through these different SOIs. But again, on page 63, the last bullet point on governance, actively engage with other key stakeholders in the region. I'd suggest adding Te Aroha into that statement, and I guess that reflects the key role Te Aroha has played in the reason why people come here and use the airport and those sort of purposes, and also again with the board internships, that's a critical role for iwi, and with respect to the tourism industry and the land upon which the airport is located, so they're noticeably absent in the board's governance philosophy and approach. And the board's policies talk about recognising the treaty, and so there's a great opportunity to follow that through by adding those into the policies.
Yeah, Thank you, Ms Mohi, and you're right in terms of where it's situated, etc. The airport. Thank you for that. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report, Thomas. I'm quoting from page 74, then I'll ask a question about on page 75. Infrastructure assets. These assets include runways, aprons, taxiways, surrounded security fences and other paved areas, pavements, car parks and roads and underground systems. On page 75, you've got under infrastructure assets, runways, taxiways, aprons, 10 to 80 years. Isn't that period of time very long? Because some of those should be quite short. And I think from memory that we have to pave or look at the runway paving within the next probably 5 to 10 years. And when this extension went in about 10 years ago.
This is a statement.
Yeah,
so you are asking a direct question around the accounting policy of depreciation. And quick response, I would say you're right that some of them are short and some of them are long, which is why there is a range there that's provided. So as an example, the resurfacing of part of the runway is scheduled, I think, from memory, 8-9 years from now. And so with regards to the renewal of those assets versus how we depreciate them is two slightly different things. But when they are new, they can have estimated useful lives, and depending on the asset, some have up to 80 years and some only have 10 years, which is why that policy is worded the way that it is.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Sorry, thank you, Councillor Gould. That is, this is a statement of intent, as you appreciate.
Yeah. Would it be better to put down the different parts at the different lengths?
Actually, as I've just said, Councillor Gould, this is a statement of intent.
I realise it's a statement of intent, but it's very ambiguous, Madam Chair.
Ambiguous?
Yes.
Yeah. It is summarised for a purpose. Just be aware that these are directly out of the annual report. They are also audited by Audit New Zealand, and they are happy with the disclosure that is being provided. So.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley? Oh, thank you. Councillor Kent?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, my question relates to page 68, and it's an issue I've raised before. You've got there a total capex budget for the 3 years, 3-year period of 7.3 million, which largely is the funding of the terminal and bus station redevelopment works. And as it states there, this is being funded by debt, BNZ, RDA and CAR facilities. I want to know why the issue of whether the airport is permitted to go and spend $7.3 million to upgrade these facilities rather than paying back debt that it owes to this council has not been brought before this council.
Yes, you have raised that before, Councillor Kent.
And I still haven't had an answer, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm not sure if that's with Park with you, Thomas, or with our CEO.
Well, that's ultimately there can be feedback provided from the statement of intent if that is a wish of the council, and that's a decision between. There are obviously seismic issues with part of the terminal that need to be resolved, and the fire station has to be rebuilt. There are also other elements with regards to pressures coming on, with regards to having clean room terminals. I know I've used the wrong terminology, but around having a heavier customs focus and more security at the airport, and having to make sure that the terminals are fit for purpose for that as well, and weighing those sort of elements up between retiring debt quicker. As I did say to you before around the
lounge as well, Thomas.
Sorry, the lounge, yeah. As I said, the comment and the feedback is we are having those discussions around getting greater alignment between those two. So we are, underneath this is a 20-year forecast with regards to line of sight on their capital renewal needs versus, their infrastructural improvements versus what's happening to their debt. And we currently have a profile, and we're just working through fully understanding the implications of this across another 20-year period, and then having those questions, as you say, as around can we accelerate debt retirement, what would the implications be, should we slow it down to achieve maybe creating greater capacity to work on the business park, etc. And so when we have greater clarity on that, we will come back to council on those as well.
Well, the issue from my point of view is it appears that it has become fait accompli that they can spend $7.3 million of increasing debt without reference to this council, and that's not satisfactory. I want that brought back before council, and I want it debated properly in council, and I want the council to make the proper decision. They do not have authority to go out and borrow $7.3 million, incurring debt on behalf of ratepayers without reference to this council. That is not acceptable.
And that is the case, isn't it? They do have to bring that back. We've seen their business, their master plan. I'm happy to. Yes, Your Worship. Thank you. You've got a
flight to Queenstown direct.
With respect, Your Worship, the statement of intent says they're going to spend 7.3 million. It's a statement of intent. I'm saying the intent's wrong, and it's got to be changed.
Intent today.
Yes,
I think councillors are unaware of what we're actually meant to be doing.
Yeah, no,
not an operational review.
So
with respect, we are looking at a statement of intent here to spend 7.3 million, which is wrong.
I'm just asking.
So it needs to come out of the statement of intent until it has been put back to this council and a decision's been made. That's the issue that I'm raising.
Thank you.
So my question to Thomas was, is this the appropriate time to raise the issue of the debt?
Yes and no, and I'll say yes and no, and I'll use a Henry. I'll go a little bit circular on this. These are the questions that we have been talking to them about and asking them on. We are currently undertaking a piece of work to get greater clarity on the long-term financial impacts of this piece of work, as well as any proposed business park, in particular around debt. First one, primary one, and the second one around council's ongoing funding, because what we do want to do is just have a stable level of funding into the long term and not have to have spikes and peaks and troughs with regards to this. So we have asked for that clarity. Part of that is it has to be embedded into our long-term plan as well, because the debt is carried through by council ultimately as well, and it has implications on our long-term plan, and we are looking to have that resolved and transparent to councillors by the time the long-term plan is adopted.
Thank you. Did you want to comment, Jeff? Because it is here in the capital expenditure proposals. So, I mean, if it's in the statement of intent, then certainly, then if someone wants to raise anything that's stated in it, then that would be correct to have it discussed. So thank you, Councillor Kent.
So if I can just backtrack, you'll recall now the airport, I think on at least two occasions, if not more, has been flagging the importance of the airport development areas. I think in the last update they showed also some of the initial design concepts that they were intending to look at for the main terminal building. As Thomas has already stated, they have an issue at this particular point with the central part of the building is actually requiring earthquake strengthening, and at the same time they also have inherited, if you like, a large terminal complex which is not currently well utilised. So their proposal is to demolish the centre section effectively and to refurbish the two ends of the terminal building, and within that looking to establish a lounge, the quarantine area, I'm not sure either what the correct name of that is, an improved food and beverage operation and so on. So that's part of what they've been flagging now for quite some time. What they're doing through the statement of intent now, of course, is to flag to you the implications as they see of this proposal. So Councillor Kent's quite right when he says that this is a matter that council needs to consider and to provide direct feedback to the airport board on as to what it is that you see this organisation actually delivering and doing. Effectively, this is their view of the next period and the opportunity for you to pick this up and to provide some feedback on it.
Thank you. No,
Madam
Your
Chair,
Worship,
if I
I'm going
can...
to move on to... thank you. I beg your pardon, sorry.
Sorry, if I could just comment, when the original...
I asked for a question, and I think it was to be helpful. Councillor Kent's had his turn too. Could I please have a supplementary?
Thank you. No, Your Worship, please. Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make the point that the initial discussions when the ideas came out from the airport, Council was under the mistaken impression that this was all being funded from profit.
That's right.
And in reality, it's turning out it's being funded by debt. That is why I'm saying before they go ahead with this, it must come back before Council with a proper accounting and to get the proper authority.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Which was exactly what I was going to say, Madam Chair.
Please go ahead. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell.
Oh, mine, page 66, 4.3. These are the government's process policies. I just wanted to, before I ask my question, appreciate and value the input that our Te Tato members, Mrs. Mohin, Berryman and Kemp, they provide to our council here, and some reference was made earlier regarding input of Māori tangata whenua, and I thought here was a bullet point that sort of acknowledged all of those. I appreciate the whakaaro and the wairua that is brought forward. So the question is, through the chair, can I ask our members, is this suffice in what you were asking earlier? Page 66, 4.3, where the RRAL does acknowledge Māori and tangata whenua, accepts the tiriti trade here and all those things that I think you were asking.
Did you want to respond,
yeah, thank you.
Mr. Berryman Kemp? Thank you for that, Councillor Maxwell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Kent, for picking that up. I was going to raise it at the end when we cover off the Rotorua economic development, because actually one of the things I see are 4 quite differently formatted documents of council-controlled organisations. The Rotorua Regional Airport has components. The Rotorua Economic Development SOI even builds on that even greater. So I acknowledge that, and I think I'd like to take that up when we get to that one.
Yes.
If that's okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, yes?
Can I just go back?
Right, thank you. You want to refer back to that?
Councillors, just I want to be clear that I think if I'm capturing correctly what you're saying is that we need to build into this feedback a clear message to the airport board that you wish to see the implications of, sorry, I've got this wording's not quite right, but the feedback should be that prior to actually committing to development of the airport building, that you wish to see a further view as to the funding implications and so on of it. That needs to be built into the feedback. Without that in the feedback, they've effectively do have the ability to continue.
Thank you for that.
Madam Chair, could I have another crack? Because I think I was actually trying to help Councillor Kent.
Well, I don't know whether that was going to be the case, because you did say, are we sure about what we're doing here today in terms of that this is a statement of intent? That's the impression that came across to me. So,
what could I please communicate what I was hoping to say? Thank you. Councillor Kent, I understand what you're asking for, and I wondered where it's got a dot point in the purpose and objectives that we could reflect in there, including a debt management plan, because it has the operate the business in a way that generates appropriate financial returns in accordance with the shareholders' objectives, and we could add in there, including a debt management plan. Or you might be asking for a slightly different financial mechanism.
I would say that would be additional to what I've suggested.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
And I'd like some clarity on the increased costs due to aviation security that have come through as part of that airport redevelopment, because we're just lucky we've got an earthquake building that needs re-strengthening, otherwise we'd be needing to do this anyway. So that's a window of opportunity for us to make sure that we're updated with the current ones. But that is a cost that is outside of their realm, and it's certainly outside of council's. It's an external requirement, and I would like some that to be fleshed out, just for understanding of the things that it happens to every organisation. Central government do it to us when they change laws, and then we have to fund them, and this has happened to the airport as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you, councillors. We've had some good discussion there on the airport, and we'll move to our next CCO, which is the T-Rex. Is it T-Rex?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, just again, the purpose of T-Rex is to develop and commercialise the T-Rex waste conversion technology. As communicated in the past, the RLC will not be building a pilot plant at the wastewater treatment plant. That is in line with the change in consent conditions and exiting the forest. And so the company itself is still focusing on domestic and international expansion and attracting new partners. So at this stage, neither of the two partners are contributing any more ongoing funding. So that's both Scion and Rotorua Lakes Council. The company itself has sufficient funds to get through to understand October-ish of this year, at which point it has to have had developed and attracted another investor, and that investor would also look to partially would reduce our shareholding in that venture going forward. Obviously, at that time, if it's unable to achieve that, then that would obviously lead to another discussion with regards to what are the next steps. But at this stage, Council is not looking to provide any more funding.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Ms Mohi?
You're trying to tell me something. So, yeah, I guess the sentence that concerns me in the summary on page 42 is that statement, ultimately dilute council share in the business. And that concerns me because of the wider plant process, the wastewater treatment plant process, and the particularly with respect to the latest proposed upgrade and the huge cultural significance that's involved with wastewater treatment. So there was a lot of significant cultural mediation proposed and recommended for the upgrades that were done by Te Aroha, and so I guess my concern is how does this movement away from council affect those mitigations that Te Aroha, there are these relationships that Te Aroha has with the council. The RMA requires these, mitigations to be observed and implemented. T-Rex is being a separate body or entity to the wider infracore process. It just concerns me that it may dilute the impact of a lot of the work that's been done, and how do we reassure Te Aroha that going forward this is not going to start widening out throughout the plant to the point that, it just was a great process. That process was really effective, and I'd hate to see it start being diluted by this movement away from council and becoming more of a commercial focus. And it's probably a little bit out of what's related, was and within the upgrade discussions was some concern was raised around the impact the T-Rex plant would have on the proposed upgrades, and it wasn't clear. We didn't get a lot of clarity around what that would do. I understand it's more on solid waste, but it was some of the processing residuals and how that would be treated in the system. So that's probably the biggie for me, is that the relationship with council and the cultural significance of wastewater, and how do we reassure Te Aroha that moving away from council into private enterprises is not going to undermine the ability to participate in those processes.
So for you, Chair, we're not looking at moving anything of what you described away from council and into a commercial enterprise. This is just one joint venture around how the industry could deal with sludge. So with regards to all the work that's taken place around the wastewater treatment plant and what is being proposed and what we are building, this has no impact on that whatsoever. So what this impacts is, at the end of all that process, we're left with a sludge product, and how can we best deal with that sludge product? And so that's still, we're still doing vermi composting at the moment. T-Rex is still an option in there. Those that, a little while ago we did describe the challenges of the T-Rex process with the new upgraded wastewater treatment plant around introducing more nitrogen back into the system, and obviously with our nitrogen challenges, and so that became a hurdle that wasn't insurmountable. But obviously the key focus for us at the moment is more the wastewater treatment plant, and we will leave it for T-Rex and the board to explore how they can commercialise that technology going forward. With one day, maybe we do use it, but at the moment it's not in our window, and has no impact on our wastewater treatment plant either at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Yes, and I know, Ms. Mohi, that you know that this has been going on for some years, and we had hoped that it would be available to us here, obviously, to utilise the technology, or to utilise the plant here. Whether that or not that comes at some later stage, I don't, well, who knows, but yes, it's still, yeah, hopefully later, we might know later this year what's and more about it.
And that, as you say, Chair, that may develop in the future, but you know, if Stavros was sitting next to me here as GM of infrastructure, as he would say, his main focus at the moment is around getting that wastewater treatment plant right, exiting the forest, ensuring that the plant is efficient and as effective as possible with regards to the quality of the water at the end of it that would go back in the lake, and that is for us the number one priority in that space. And T-Rex itself, you know, will sit to the side of that, but has no impact on that at the moment.
Just through you, Madam Chair, and I think that's the crux of the issue, is the product that comes at the end of the process. Yes. And the concern is that we wouldn't want it to undermine the position that Te Anau have taken on this, because it's been you know, it's pushed boundaries for everybody, so it is a real concern that we keep a lens on this and understand better what it may do for the system if it's indeed built.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mohi. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. I don't see anywhere in this statement of intent any intention to repay the ratepayers of Rotorua the many millions that they've invested in this folly.
So it's a councillor that is there, and probably not as explicit as how you've said it. And how it is there is that by the attraction of both domestic and international expansion, and bringing new partners in, that actually unlocks the value of the shareholding. And when you introduce a new partner, you obviously dilute your shareholding by either introducing new shares or selling down your shares. And so returning some of the value that the community has put into this would be extracted via that process.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to think that rather than folly, it could be something quite revolutionary. So let's hope so. Thank you, Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a query with regard to when you touched on the upgrading of the sewage treatment plant that's about to be undertaken. The sludge that's produced, are we confident that this will still be acceptable for the vermicasting process? Or would we maybe have to start looking at landfill again?
To be honest, Madam Chair, I'm not the best person to answer this. Unfortunately, Stavros, who is in a workshop at the moment working on the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, so we can follow that up. But at this point, with regards to the overall project, that hasn't been a risk that's been identified. So I would personally assume therefore that's okay, but no doubt that team is looking at that and working on that.
Thank you. Ms. Mohi?
But just further to the Councillor Binkley's question, currently the waste is sent over to Kawerau. Is there an intent to perhaps keep that business back here in Rotorua, make our local business around that, and the flow on, like the truck? There's a lot of flow on that was discussed.
Now these are questions that should probably be asked of Stavros at another time rather than as a discussion of T-Rex. But yes, good. Yeah.
I think my last point really was that because of the high significance this has for Te Aroha in terms of wastewater, I would suggest that Te Amorangi and Gina Rangi are given an opportunity to perhaps give some comment on the SOI and give us a reflection, perhaps just to gain a better understanding of what the reduced council share might mean for Te Aroha.
Well, I think for all of us, not just for Te Aroha, but for all of us. And at this stage, we don't know that. They've already signalled that it will be later in the year before they can report back to us. And that will be another one of their quarterly, was it quarterly, I think? Reports that will come to us, Ms Mohi. So that will be coming up at some stage later this year as well.
I'm just alluding more to the cultural level, because it's wastewater, that department be given an opportunity to give us some clarity around the particular, what it might mean from a cultural perspective.
Thank you. That can be noted as feedback for them. Thank you. I'd like to move... Oh, Councillor Hunt?
To make a statement which might help Ms Mohi here. My understanding is, and Councillor Bentley, the dewatering process for the sludge doesn't change. So that's one point. The cost effectiveness of sending it to Kawerau is partly the amount of land you require, and also the fact it's mixed with Tasman pulp, clean pulp. So where it is based is equidistant, so it's a good spot for that. And that ideally, so we don't need it at the moment, because the cost of us getting rid of our sludge is actually pretty inexpensive nationally. So for us to implement a plant would be, it would be a nice to have, but actually it would provide us no benefit and certainly cost us a lot of money. But for the IP to be used globally has significant benefit. And when that plant gets up and running, and I'm going to be on the positive and assume that there will be one, there could be significant financial benefit to this council for having been one of the shareholders at the beginning. So I just wanted to,
thank you.
Moment to add that little bit of clarity. I hope that's helpful.
And that would definitely be our hope for that as well. Thank you. I'd like to move now to the Rotorua Economic Development Limited Statement of Intent, please.
Sorry, Hilda, can you just move it forward one? The presentation doesn't seem to be want to work down this end. So I do have Michael Hancock with me, who's able to answer any questions, but again the purpose is the business development, investment attraction, along with the delivery of the eyesight and international trade promotions. So we are looking at funding of $4.3 million for next year. That's a $100,000 increase, I think, on what is currently being provided. The feedback itself is more focused on its performance measures, and I'll happily hand over to Michael to give you some clarity on that.
Kia ora tātou.
Good morning.
Okay, so I suppose the key things we'll focus on in terms of these measures are the new measures that they've added in. The ones that they currently have, you sort of see they're progressing as they go. But I particularly want to highlight, I suppose, the role that Destination Rotorua will have in supporting our big moves. And those are reflected there under investment attraction. And really, I suppose it's around that practical advice from investment intelligence, working alongside our partners, and just really providing the operational assistance to help us move these along and contribute towards the Rotorua 2030 vision. Another key thing to highlight there as well is a change in the way that they are measuring their international expenditure, and really, I suppose the purpose for that, basing it around accommodation, recreational services and dining, is to be able to benchmark against other cities. At the moment, while the process allows us to measure, I suppose, progress over time compared to where we were at particular points, say from this year compared to last year, this particular new approach will allow us to benchmark more confidently with a less margin of error against, say, Queenstown or other sorts of cities, and give us a real good idea around how we measure up against these other cities. Good.
Thank you. So, yes, Your Worship.
spotted it. It's got health and wellness, but the health and wellness was very much focused around geothermal as our natural asset. So I'd like to see that included.
Unfortunately, Jean-Paul is at the PC10 hearing, so probably can't be able to provide feedback. My understanding, though, is that it's great our alignment to Vision 2030, and I think that is also a component of 2030, so it might have that link already at that level. So it's just a question of what level of granularity do we provide in there, and the level of visibility in the strategic document. Yeah, but we can provide that feedback.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Mohi?
Kia ora. I think this SOI is actually an excellent example of a document that clearly acknowledges and articulates the relationship with Te Aroha. So take note, other CCOs. However, what I don't see is any reference or promotion of environmental sustainable business, development and economic growth strategies that, surprisingly, given the strong cultural relationship throughout the document, there's not a lot of there is no reference to any environmental sustainable development or even kaitiakitanga opportunities. So I see that this CCO actually has a great opportunity for it to change the way we do business if we're courageous, and strongly encourage that amendments are made to reflect the growing desire within our community and globally for business and industry players to act ethically, responsibly, and have respect for our natural and physical resources. Yeah, so great cultural lens, but nothing about the environment.
Yes, it is. It really is quite different from the others, and even some components are very portable if you look at it. So thank you for that. It's noticeable when you can. And the thing is, we're not comparing them, but we're looking at them and the documents, and this is a good example. So thank you for highlighting that, Ms. Mohi. Mr. Berryman-Camp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just to build on that, yes, thank you for the report. And actually, I'd just like to talk all that in terms of a statement of intent. I'll get to my question. One of the points was this appeared to me to be a Rotorua council-controlled organisation's statement of intent, whereas the other three could have been statements of intent for any other council. There was nothing that really stood out. My question, so I'm very comfortable with the format as well and the inclusion of things within that. But my question is there not an opportunity to look at either templated or standardised statement of intent guidelines for council-controlled organisations so that we can actually have some consistency of statement, and I would assume consistency of reporting to fall out of that? Given that in the LTP discussions there's a proposal to raise another CCO, so we could end up with 5 different versions. So that's my question. Whether that's a question for staff or for council, I'm unsure.
That's an easy one for us to answer. So from a reporting perspective, we already provide a standardised template. So those at the Operations and Monitoring Committee will notice that the format of the regular reporting is now in a standardised format. As I was actually pondering and writing this report, and noticed that as well, is that the differences in the statement of intents is that while ultimately they're governed by the Act as to what is to be included, I did ponder as to whether we use the same approach and provide a template with regards to some of the expectations and the layouts that we have, because at the moment you will notice that they are slightly different. So, and that's something that we'll get the democracy team to work on for next time.
Thank you. Yes, I'm sure there is the potential to have something that is pretty similar for each one, because it does, when you're looking at them together, then you can see clearly where the difference is, and actually where it could be very helpful because one statement of intent has incorporated something that could well be applicable to the others. And so I'm sure that, yeah, well, I mean, that's something that our executive team or the democracy team will look at, I'm sure. Thank you. Councillor Gould, and then Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thomas, financial question. Page 108. At the bottom, you've got a yellow XYZ Can you please tell me what the figure should be?
Very, very little, councillor, because their assets that they have is more small plant and equipment items, obviously office and furniture and those sorts of items. So it's just a case of extracting that out and putting a figure in. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's not a significant amount.
Second question relates to the same page. Under revenue, you got other revenue, you got 18, 19, 20, 21, you got 400, 500, 600, 700,000. What sort of revenue is that, and why should it go up exactly $100,000 per year?
I understand that that's more targeted at leveraging external funding to achieve projects, and that's ultimately the board has decided that that's the level of growth that they would like to see in that area. So I don't have the information as to why they've landed on that, but from a budgeting perspective, obviously having nice round numbers and nice targets to hit are more useful than
Yes, trading revenue hasn't gone up much per year either. You know, sometimes you'd expect a bigger return if there's more events on, like particularly this year with the Commonwealth Games. You would expect more visitors to come to Rotorua, or like the, you've got 2020-21 or the rugby games. You know, with the people coming back from Japan to New Zealand coming back home.
Yeah, and I think at a high level when the budget's been set, so a lot of those other revenue lines just have inflationary increases. And as we get closer to those years, there'll be a heavier focus on looking at some of those opportunities and refining those budgets a bit more in detail as we get closer to them. But at the moment, I'd say that it's just an inflationary increase across that 3-year period.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to take one page, 115, headed attachment 4 should actually be the last page of attachment 3 and should occur at page 88.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you, yes. Well spotted. Councillor Tapsell.
Oh, thank you. And it's just a very broad comment about, and it kind of touches on what Ms Mohere has raised with the environment as well. I think one thing that is missing in here, they've mentioned not-for-profit and partnering with them, but I think there could be a clearer, perhaps, signal that they're able to or willing to partner with community organisations as well, and that kind of comes down to two things that would be awesome to see in here, and those are values that Rotorua is very well known for and what we were established on, and that is firstly kaitiakitanga and secondly manaakitanga. And manaakitanga is that hospitality that we've provided to people over many years and that we still do now, and I think that we have amazing community organisations out there like the mountain biking community in the forest, like the community associations in the lakes that are doing a lot to support that brand of Rotorua and our unique selling points that they're talking about in here, and I just think it would be very good for them to, if they aren't already, partnering with them and providing support that they can, and I want that, well, I would, my comment is having that in the statement of intent at that very high level, so not talking about how they can yet, but just that signalling that that would be a very beneficial way to go about continuing to promote Rotorua. It aligns exactly with the brand and the unique selling propositions as I've mentioned, and yeah, so that would be a rather important comment I would like them to consider.
Thank you for that. Councillor Maxwell.
Tēnā korua. My question is on page 112. What has been helpful, Madam Chair, is we've been getting all the directors of each CCO named and everything, which has been very helpful and good refresher of who we've selected for these groups. Can you help me with the information on 7.5, the Economic Development Advisory Group and the model up there? Who are those ones on that board again, or the advisory group, Mikaere?
It is.
Kia ora tātou. So the Economic Development Advisory Group is a group that's chaired by Councillor Dave Donaldson. It's pulled together people from across the community. Sorry, I won't name everybody off the top of my head, just in case I've missed people. Largely prominent business people within our community. A couple of so you've got Frank Joe from the Chinese community. So really it's about getting people that represent specific areas of our community, bringing them all in the room and getting their guidance, I suppose, on our specific projects and stuff that we want to try and do as council. That's my understanding of the role of this group.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Your Worship?
I like the principles. I think the principles Councillor Tapsell was referring to are right, but this organisation really is into, perhaps it can go in the destination making. That's the principle, rather than work with NGOs. So they are very engaged and they've brought it to us about looking at developing the destination based on our proposition, our cultural proposition and our natural assets. So I like what you're saying, but I think it's not this organisation. I wouldn't put it in the statement of intent that they partner with all of those community groups doing it, but they uphold the principle. Yes. Somehow that be reflected.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to move recommendation 2.2.
Thank you.
Just made a couple.
Want to? Oh. Thank you very much, Councillor Bentley. Did I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Yes. There's just a few slight amendments that have come through that we're going to make, that have come through from the discussion that we've had this morning. Thank you. So we'll just get that up and then we'll have see if that's a reflection of what we, particularly the main points that came through. Rather cold in here, isn't it? Or is it just me? Okay. So,
final cost.
Let me just have a look now that the can you just make it a bit bigger? I'm sorry because I'm thank you. So that would be, now let me have that would be the recommendation. Right, now sorry, who was the mover and the seconder? We had a mover and a second, Councillor Bentley and Councillor Gould, that's right. I'll read this out. The recommendation is that the committee resolves to make comment on the draft statements of intent for Infracore Limited, Terex Limited Partnership, Rotorua Regional Airport Limited, and Rotorua Economic Development Limited as outlined in the report. 2.1, that the Airport Board, prior to committing to the redevelopment of the airport building, report to Council the final costs, including the costs of security areas and proposed funding mechanisms. 2.2, that all CCOs be asked to reflect on how well the SOI responds to and reflects Council's commitment to the partnership with Te Tātou o Te Arawa and environmental sustainability. That's been moved by Councillor Bentley.
Madam Chair, can I just point out that under 2.1 there it says report to Council the final costs, that infers after the event we want the actual budget, finalised budget to come back to us, not the actual final costs, perhaps.
Report to the Council for, what was the wording, Councillor?
To report to Council
just the
final budget.
Yes.
Final budget. Or the budget?
Or the
proposed, I suppose you. Oh no, proposed is there already.
Final. It's not really final. Take it.
No.
You want the clear budget.
The budget, really, isn't it? It is the budget, or the total budget, I suppose. No, just the budget.
The budget for finalised plans, or something like that.
Finalised plans, including the costs of security areas and proposed. Yes.
Yeah, that's better.
That's fine. Thank you. I won't read it again because there's just been that slight change there, but it has now. Any further discussion? Otherwise, I'll thank you. It's been moved by.
Sorry, Madam Chair, but in the brackets, I'm not sure why we're just pulling out the cost of security areas. We had also. Yeah,
Well, I think,
I'd take that out.
We actually don't.
but that was specifically asked for. I remember that was.
So we don't mind about the fire service capability and all the other little bits?
Well, I think the other little bits will be there, but this one was specifically by, I think it was Councillor Hunt. That
Recognising for our community that there are costs that are put upon us that we have no control over, and the airport is no different. Because sometimes the community think we're just spending money because we choose to, or our CCOs
and that is
are.
one that's been
some
imposed.
of the costs.
So it's air
are unavoidable.
aviation security
Yes,
that you want in there, and we should be specific about that.
including the cost of air
Not just security.
Yes. Air aviation. AI. Well, thank you. I'll just read that number 2.1 again, please, because that has, thank you. Right, that the airport board, prior to committing to the redevelopment of the airport building, report to council the budget for finalised plans, including the costs of air aviation security areas and proposed funding mechanisms. That's fine, thank you. I think we're all clear on that. So it's been moved by Councillor Bentley, seconded by Councillor Gould. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you, councillors. Recommendation 3, which is on page 116 of our hard copy. I'd like to have a mover and a seconder, please, at the report, disposal of council-owned land for a public work, widening of State Highway 30/Tenai Road be received. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Also, Councillor Gould. Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary. Thank you. Carried. Thank you, Henry.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and I'm stepping in for Stavros today, who's at his wastewater treatment meeting. So look, I'm happy to take the paper as read, and the only thing I'd really emphasise is this is obviously an important procedural step that the council needs to be looking at before moving into, I guess, the long talked about upgrade and widening of Tenai Road, starting from the Sala Street corner and moving up past Neil Hunt Road. Neil Hunt Park.
Neil Hunt Park, thank you. Thank you, councillors. Are there any questions? And thank you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to ask the status of the caveats that have been placed on the properties that Council owned. Where are we up to with those?
My understanding is that the caveats do sit across pretty well all of the gifted land. So in specific cases where there's agreement to move ahead with initiatives, they'll be lifted off. So they won't cause any issue here. So the caveats were placed on by the trust, and certainly in the discussions we've had with them around, it only affects the Sala Street corner. They haven't identified any issues with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, councillors, yes, Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, thank you, Henry, for your report. On page 119 with the map you've got shown with the orange part, which is being handed over to NZTA. What about when you turn left coming down from Tenai Road into Sala Street? Would you think you'd need more land on that side too? I'm looking at this.
Probably, to be honest, it's not overly relevant what I would think. These are the designs which have been put forward by the NZTA, and they're satisfied it'll address the issues that are there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mohi. Sorry, Mr. Perryman. Gosh.
Close enough.
There you are, Gina.
Yes, kia ora, thank you for the report, and first of all, we'd like to commend you on the report, because I think it clearly articulated iwi interests, which is great, because that has been a thing that we've been requesting and going through. In the spirit of continual improvement, might I suggest that also think about any particular trusts or in corporations, and I know that certainly Paupukuru or Ruawhata are also in there. And the only last comment that I'd like to make, I'm certainly quite comfortable to support this, because I know that this is an outcome of the previous discussion on the Eastern material, running on the assumption Apu Moana Marae have been engaged. Obviously, they're just off the area that is in the pack. We would assume that they would be comfortable with this, given they were predominantly one of the drivers in terms of the eastern arterial work, but just wanted to check to see if that had taken place.
To be honest, I'm not totally sure whether it has in relation to this particular aspect around the bit of Neil Hunt Park, but obviously as the upgrade to the Rotorua roundabout happens, and they're going to have to be looking at all the exits and sort of egresses onto the road, and that'll be on both sides of the road, on Apu Moana side as well as on the side the outdoorsman's on, because they'll have to be looking at how that all fits together.
Thank you. Ms Mohi?
Just adding to Eugene's kōrero, Hururunga Tarangi would probably be the hapu to speak to, and I think, you know, given that this was an outcome of a taki that was really important to the hapu there, hopefully you'll get a favourable response. And the other point which was raised by one of our other Te Tatau board members was that, particularly with respect to the Sala Stream disposal piece that's been disposed, it's clearly acknowledged that Pukeroa Ruawhata is the trust that has legal authority. However, it would be prudent to also acknowledge the mana whenua in that area, and it just highlights that we find ourselves continually as Te Aroa in this, is it the trust, is it the hapu, you know, and that's just how it is for us right now. So I think it would be cautious approach by council to try and do both.
Yes. Thank you. Your Worship?
Can I thank you for your comments to Tātou members, because our Deputy Mayor's on the working party, and it has been an exhausting process with Stavros, working with Hapu and others. And I think that wider picture is not understood, that they've been active participants on the working party, and it's been a great learning for everybody. So it's nice that you show leadership to acknowledge that. And also, you know, I think Deputy Dave as well. This has been many meetings with Stavros and those affected. So it's a good conclusion today that we're actually going to be deliberating on.
Thank you. You're moving, Councillor Kent, is that correct? Thank you. Thank you, and Councillor Hunt, thank you. So the second point there, that the committee recommends to Council that the required parts of the Council-owned land on Sala Street and at Neil Hunt Park is disposed of to New Zealand Transport Agency in accordance with the appropriate provisions of Public Works Act 1981 for the purposes of the upgrade of the Sala Street intersection and the widening of State Highway 30/Tenai Road. It has been moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Hunt. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, carried. Thank you very much. There's one item that we would could go into public excluded, but it is really only for the minutes of a meeting that was held. So I wonder if I could just put that, and we don't then have to go into public excluded. Thank you. Yes, because it is the only matter in the public excluded session, so that is to adopt the confidential minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 15th of March 2018 be confirmed as a true and correct record. That was moved by Councillor Hunt, seconded by Councillor Gould. So I'll put that now. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Carried. Thank you very much, councillors, for your participation this morning. I'll now declare... Yes, that just needs to be deleted. Thank you. So thank you for your input this morning, and I declare our meeting closed. Thank you. Kia ora. And lunch is in the green room. There is lunch in the green room, councillors. Thank you.
Hang around half the day.
You are remote.
No, the Brunswick Water Supply. Brunswick Water Supply, of which I'm still the chairman.
Yeah. Even though you don't live there.
I still do all that.
You delegated.
I do all their books and that for them as well.